Today we are taking on the topic of co-packing, self-production, and we're talking to two different teams, three different people who have expertise in this. And so we're looking to have a conversation that can be really informative and help people make the decision, whether that decision is now or if that decision is on the roadmap down the road. We hope that this will serve as something that is really helpful and informative. And of course, if you have more questions at the end of this conversation, we will put up our websites from each organization and available to work with you and take questions and help you through whatever journey, wherever you are in your business path right now. So officially, welcome to co-packing or self-production. Which one is right for your brand? My name is Marcy Masura. I am acting as moderator for this webinar today. And really here just to sort of facilitate conversation and keep things moving on and staying on time. I did mention in the chat that we will be recording this webinar today, and we will be making it available to those of you who have registered to attend. I'm speaking to people that aren't here. They will also have access to it. And then for those of you that are here, you'll also receive this once it's processed. And we appreciate if you share that with anybody you think that would be of value who may have missed. Today, we're going to do introductions. We'll start with the Amped Kitchens team. So we have a few slides about them. Mott, maybe you can start talking about yourself and what you do, what Amped does, and then we can move on to Brian.
So thanks, Marcy, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We all are on Zoom all the time, and so we appreciate you spending your Zoom time with us. Amped Kitchens has been open and operating since 2015, and Brian Albert, who's here on the panel as well, my business partner, he and I founded it because we saw a real need in the food industry to help fill a gap between recipes that are developed on the benchtop and products that are produced at scale. And we're going to talk a lot today with Ali and with you guys about the challenges of scaling and about how to find the right solution. But we built Amped because we wanted to make sure that there was a place where products that might not be ready for very high volume production of co-packer have a great place to go where brands can do hands-on production in an iterative, discovery-oriented way and can be profitable with a lot less capital and a lot faster than they can be with co-packer. To give you an idea of what Amped Kitchens is, we've got 3 locations, 2 in Los Angeles, a brand new one in Chicago. Each of them has between 54 and 62 private permit-ready kitchens where brands can come in and lease a space and have their own manufacturing facility that is exclusively theirs, supported by amenities like storage, loading docks, our team. It's a place that offers a lot of flexibility, and it can be everything from gluten-free to kosher to USDA. And this slide gives you a sense of how we've characterized the value of self-manufacturing at a place like Amped, which is if you're out there kind of doing it on your own, based on the food industry people that we interviewed before we opened and have continued to maintain relationships with, it can cost people between, say, $500,000 to millions of dollars to launch a product either at a co-packer or in a facility that they own and control themselves. We aim to save people over 90% of those costs. And instead of the 12 plus months it often takes to launch a product out in the wild, many of our tenants are able to do it in just a matter of weeks. And so that's the story of Amped.
Great. And thank you, Mott, for that introduction to yourself and as well as Amped Kitchens. Brian, would you like to say hi to everybody?
Yeah, hello, everyone. And that was a great introduction. I don't have too much more to add other than to kind of emphasize who we at Amped serve, which is everyone from, folks just getting started as and getting that first level of success with their food business. And a great example of that is a company like Fourth and Heart, which is a maker of ghee that started with us when they were serving, I think, 3 or 4 farmers markets, and moved out when they were the second largest ghee maker in the country. And so, we serve quite a broad range of kind of the success and growth path of a lot of companies. But we also serve a number of already successful companies, including Beyond Meat, that launched the Beyond Burger out of our facility, and Halo Top, Soylent, and a number of very large beverage manufacturers. And so our facility really takes a pretty broad range of companies and can help them be successful.
Thank you. Great. And excited to have Ali talk about Pilot R&D and why he's here today.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Ali Bouzari. I'm one of the co-founders of Pilot R&D, and I'm our Chief Science Officer. Pilot is basically, we're a product development and scale-up firm. So we do all of our work on a contract consulting basis with our clients. Those clients, I think similar to what AMP just described, it's everybody from a person who just finished their time doing one kind of career track and wanted to get into, I don't know, making a great bottled coffee, all the way up to the biggest food companies in the world. I would say that most of our clients are somewhere in between. We work with a lot of people who have like good, sustainable regional businesses that are trying to take the next step, or they have products that are on the market and they want to spin out new flavors or new SKUs, or they want to create something new, but they have the resources at their disposal to really do it right. We work in every category of food. So we're just as comfortable working on chocolate as we are beer, or snacks, or baked goods, or frozen foods, or you name it. We typically don't work on infant formula and pet food because we don't really have the palate for it. And the way that we work is we help pretty much everything that touches the food itself. So our focus is on not just making like a good benchtop prototype. Frankly, a recipe has no value until it can be actually implemented at the scale that you're looking for. And then we help walk those benchtop prototypes through several rounds of reformulation, help our clients source ingredients from scaled, reputable suppliers who can provide all the documentation that's necessary, and then also help them find whatever their happy resting place is for scaled production, whether that's at a place like AMPed, whether that's at a co-packer, or even many of our clients have their own production facilities that we can help. Our goal is to just help play within whatever sandbox you have. So.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important before we dive into a webinar of this nature is to have that moment where people understand who each of you are and your expertise, so that the answers that we might provide here today have a little bit more credibility. It's a little bit like putting a resume up front. I think that gave a good explanation of both the areas of expertise. And we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. I did want to flag for our attendees, if you would like to leave a question in the chat, if we have time at the end, we'll scroll through and grab a couple. If we don't have time, we will pass those on to our panelists and reach out to you with answers and try to help you solve whatever the burning question might be. So we will be taking note of all of those. So as we go, feel free to put a question in the chat. Okay, so the obvious beginning place here, right? Co-packing or self-production, which one is right for your brand? Let's go ahead and go to our first question that we want to address today is, when is the right time? Timing is everything. When is the right time to scale a brand or product? What are those things that we need to hit, those markers? Where do we need to be before we move on to the next level? And I'd like to start with you, Ali, on this and get your thoughts on when you think the right time is for brands to move.
It's going to depend a lot on what the goals of a particular brand is, but I think the common through lines that we would see are having a clear vision of what you want. I think the scale up process is not a time to say, I don't know, should this be a nutrition bar? Should this be a beverage? Should this be a potato chip? Like, I think having a clear vision of what's going to happen is really, really important. Interestingly, I think there are a lot of things we'll talk about more about when a product is ready to go to scale.
Mm.
But I think when a brand is ready to go to scale, a lot of it has to do with stuff that's external to what we do. Really not to do with the product at all. Like, you should have a sales plan. You should have a sales team ready to go, because whether you're producing an amped or whether you're producing at a co-packer, you're going to be sitting on a ton of volume of whatever your precious, delicate, fragile product is. You want to make sure it has a safe home to go to. And so we've seen a lot of people who will say, like, all right, we just made 100,000 units of this thing. Anybody have Whole Foods' number? Not literally, but that kind of thing can happen. And so I think there's like, you must be ready to take the plunge. And in terms of being well capitalized, I think that having every step in the process of scaling a food product costs just a crazy amount of money. So having access to that, either funds that have already been gathered or line into the investors that you're going to talk to, I think that's really important. That's not to say that you have to have everything in hand before you start that journey. We have a lot of clients who will get through, I don't know, halfway through a project, and they'll want to pause for a couple months because now they have a clearer idea, not just of the prototype that they can show people in a boardroom, but where the ingredients are going to come from, what their base cost model is going to look like, and finish things out that way. But at least having the big picture plan of how you're going to do this at scale is really, really important.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the idea of like having your business ducks in a row. How are you going to pay for this scaling? How are you going to sell what you're making? All of these things. Yeah, it makes sense. I don't know, Mott or Brian, if you have any thoughts on that, because I know your vantage point is watching individuals, make those scaling decisions. And if you see any commonalities there where it's a trigger for people to to scale out.
Right. And by the way, thank you, Jordan, for your comment and your sort of clarification of this question. For those of you who didn't see it, we had a member of the audience bring up the notion that it's tough to get to the point where you can have that kind of sales plan that Ali's talking about until you've achieved a moderate level of success on your own. And that's where you can actually start getting investment, et cetera. And that brings up, I think, the most important threshold question, which is the chicken or the egg. You need to, again, as Ali said, you need to have a recipe and a process that will scale before you could even take on the possibility of fulfilling a large purchase order from someone. And so getting to that point is very, very challenging. And that's why it's so important, I think, that part of the answer to this question is the right time is when you know what you're doing and you know how to do it, and you know that when that large order comes in, you can push the go button and proceed. And so it takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of work with professionals like Pilot R&D and other firms. And it takes a lot of experience, hopefully yourself, manufacturing a product where you can get a lot of hands-on knowledge about how to do it. So again, it gives you that confidence to be able to say yes. The story that I always think about is we've had many tenants actually, but there's one I'm thinking of who also made ghee, and she was in our smallest kitchen and was doing farmers market work and got an order for about 10,000 units from thrivemarket.com. And she had about 2 weeks to be able to fulfill that order if she wanted to keep it open. And because she knew what she was doing, because she knew the process, at the risk of sounding somewhat self-serving, because she was at Amped, where she knew that she could have access to virtually unlimited storage and move to a larger production space literally overnight, she was able to say yes to that order and actually do it. And now she's huge and doing awesome. So in addition to everything Ali said, I would just add the right time is when you have a grasp on how to scale, where you're going to source your ingredients, what your process is going to look like, what your recipe is going to look like, et cetera.
Great. And that sort of is a perfect segue for the next question, which is getting more granular, right? Like, when and why do you go to a co-packer? What's the why? Why does anybody go to a co-packer versus staying in the self-manufacturing, self-production zone? So Mott, if you could carry through on that thought that you were sort of talking about, that the flexibility and nimbleness to scale. But at some point, is there a decision where you say, you know what, it's time?
Yeah.
Would like to hear your thoughts.
I'm going to give a couple of quick bullet point answers, and then hopefully Brian and Ali will flesh those out a little bit. But let me just say that there are two broad categories of reasons to go to a co-packer: good reasons and bad reasons. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. I mean, the first reason to go to a co-packer is because you need to produce more product than you can do yourself. And hopefully it's going to give you a lower unit cost to do it. Other reasons to go to a co-packer, which may or may not be good reasons, is maybe they've got the permits that you need. Maybe they've got the technology that you need. Maybe a lot of we've had tenants who have gone to a co-packer for personal reasons, because the partnership was splitting up. And they could no longer run their self-manufacturing facility, and so they needed to outsource it. Again, those are a variety of reasons to do it. I'd like to throw it out to Brian and Ali to expand on that.
I just addressing the other side of this and thinking about when self-manufacturing makes sense. It's always been our perspective that, for food companies for whom it's important to retain control of their process, whether that's for, IP reasons, protecting the recipe, whether that's because they have a very specialized process that's hard to transfer, whether it's because their volumes don't justify the minimum orders or whatever, those kind of reasons, self-manufacturing will often be a good option. And we really opened up AMP Kitchens with the idea that it can really increase your self-manufacturing runway and give you a lot more room, and really going to Jordan's question about cost, really reduce the upfront costs in production by coming to an option like AMP, to be able to, really stay in control of your manufacturing for quite a bit longer period on the product's life. So, those are some of the big reasons. I'm interested to hear from Ali also on how you think about this.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it comes down to control, and control can be liberating. It can also be a crushing burden. I mean, this is there is no fill out this personality chart and it will tell you what's right. Like, it is so specific to your actual personality and where your brand is at and all these things. But I think of it a lot like the question of owning or leasing something. If you are going to a co-packer, you do not own the facility, but if something breaks, it's not on you to fly like a technician out from Berlin to fix your equipment. If your shift manager quits, it's not on you to hire a headhunter to figure out the right operations person to bring in. And there's a lot of that can be on autopilot. On the flip side, if you're self-manufacturing, you can produce whenever you want. You don't have to worry about like a big client coming in and saying, you know what, we're going to take all of the line time for the next 6 months. And the co-packer says, sorry, you're going to have to get pushed out. You can have a lot of creative control. We'll get into this, but one of the main qualms that any co-packer has with a new product is if it's not exactly what they've been producing before, you're already working a little bit on an uphill path. Whereas if you are building things out on your own, you can do it however you want, as long as it's safe. That's actually another one is for all of how much trash I'm about to talk about, how a lot of co-packers are like calcified, stilted dinosaurs. They also do have a lot of historical industry expertise, and they can tell you, yeah, you don't want to do this in such and such way because this company that we saw a decade ago got sued over whatever they were doing. So there's no perfect answer, but I think that typically more nimble, smaller, creative enterprises probably have more of an argument towards self-manufacturing. Whereas if you want to make hundreds of thousands of units, you don't want to assemble your own workforce, and you kind of want to piggyback off of some of that foundation that a co-packer can provide, that may shunt you towards that side of the flow chart. But we've seen people cross over, and we've seen people actually go back and forth, sometimes multiple times over the course of half a decade.
Interesting. Okay, so no offense to any co-packers listening in, but appreciate the honest take and the honest response there, Ali. If we then look at either a co-packer or a self-manufacturing, self-production facility, these are really partnerships. These are relationships that you're putting your brand into these relationships. And so let's talk a little bit. I guess it's a bit like dating or something, but like how do people, Ali, know if this co-packer is horrible and an old dinosaur and not flexible, or they're good? And then we'll piggyback on that and sort of talk about how do we know if you're in a self-production facility, if that's going to work too. But Ali, if you want to take the lead on that, and
yeah,
how do you make that decision? How do people make that decision?
It's just like dating. It's a perfect analogy. And similar to dating, I would say step one is lower the bar. Unfortunately. So
oh my gosh,
I'll add some context to that. Most of us weren't like born and raised in the food industry, in scaled food production. My colleagues and I come from the legal world. We come from scientific labs. We come from being restaurant chefs. Pretty much every creative or professional occupation has higher standards of customer service than industrial food production. Consumer interface is not high on the priority list for really anybody we've talked to in food production. That doesn't mean that everybody is rude or that everybody is irresponsible. It just means that the average bar, if you're used to, like, I don't know, talking to an attorney who, if you're trying to do a contract negotiation, will be available to talk to you at 10 p.m. on a Friday. That is, think more like bank hours for talking to a co-packer. And so that said, once the expectations have been managed for all of this, outside of some really tangible checking of the boxes, like, is this co-packer certified gluten-free? What are their minimums? Are they on the other side of the country from you? All of those like really tangible things I think are easier to suss out. The next piece comes completely from personality. And the characteristic that I would rate most highly for all of our clients that we would look for in a co-packer is a collaborative can-do attitude. If you're 15 seconds into describing the pitch of what your product is to see if a co-packer is a good fit, and they've already poked like 17 holes saying, well, let me just stop you right here. We can't blend, we can't heat, we don't want to work with eggs, though we can. I don't really know what that spice is. I've never heard of it before. Like, if there's just kind of if it feels like there's a brick wall being put up, that's valuable data. And it's not an insurmountable hurdle. But if you have the luxury of maybe being able to look at 3 or 4 possible co-packing options and all other things equal, stuff is going to go wrong with, like, invariably. Something is going to go not according to plan. And what I would always look for in a co-packer is a person who I can turn to and say, all right, as expected, something went wrong. Let's get to the nitty gritty of solving this problem. You want that person to be like ride or die with you as much as possible. And with the expectation that generally that's not a co-packer's business model. There are shades of gray where we have had co-packers in the past tell us, we recognize the opportunity of this project. We see there's a ton of volume potential. Frankly, this product tastes amazing, but unfortunately, we've been putting saltine crackers into different colored boxes since the 50s, and this isn't a saltine cracker. So while we have all the equipment to do it, it doesn't make sense for our business. And I would say those are the type of co-packing operations that I would be the most hesitant to jump straight into. Unless
a forced fit where it feels like you're making them take your business. Like that would be bad. Yeah.
Yep. Which to some extent, they will all feel like that. And at one point or another, almost every co-packing relationship is just like, please take my money. But within that context, and there's a bunch of blanket general, like everything, there are co-packers that are ahead of that curve and co-packers that are behind it. Ones that are ahead of it are still going to be co-packers. And it's not that they're evil or they're lazy or they're nefarious in any way. It's just that their business incentives are not aligned with being blue sky creative. They want to produce stuff efficiently, consistently, and at high volumes. And within that sort of basic friction, just finding a co-packer who maybe has even just a co-packer who has a person dedicated to new business development and a new client intake is great and is the exception to the rule. Many co-packers just have like, one of the founders who, whenever they have a spare 15 minutes, will talk to you. Others will have, somebody in QA or ops who, again, just kind of moonlights as a new business development person. But our favorite co-packers to work with are people who we can pick up the phone and say, hey, we have this question, that question, whatever. And there's actually somebody on the other end rather than just a rotating carousel of whoever's off that day. I would say that's big there. And honestly, that would apply if we were looking at Amped versus like some small, just like random commissary kitchen or whatever. The first point of contact is going to be a really important person. And having, even if there are failures in their attempts to provide good customer service, the fact that they are attempting is a good sign. And if that sounds pessimistic, it's value corrected.
I mean, having a consistent front line, right? So and making that effort goes a long way for sure. Yeah. Okay, so on that same vein, Brian and Mott, what makes a good facility to do self-production and self-manufacturing in? I'm obviously it's not enough to just say, well, we do, but what are the components that went into building Amped, let's say, to make sure that it provides a good partner experience?
Yeah, I mean, I love how Ali framed it with there's the kind of tangible stuff, there's the basic requirements. It's the same with the co-packer and with us. Like with the co-packer, do they have enough equipment to make to fulfill your minimum order quantities, for instance? With us, it's pretty simple. If you're looking at, say, the sort of commissary kitchens that are out there floating around, most of them don't have storage, which is probably the number one thing that our tenants say they need to have flexibly. A lot of facilities don't have the ability to handle specialized processes like we do. I know there are other great ones out there like the Hatchery in Chicago, also can handle some specialized stuff, but most kind of run-of-the-mill places out there, if you need to modify the HVAC system to accommodate, say, some wood-fired preparation or something like that, they're not going to be able to do it out of the gate. Unlike us, where we've got people on our team who will help you engineer a solution from day one. So that you don't have to worry about the technical side of the process. We'll help you with that. There are other basic things. Are they compatible with USDA? Do they have a USDA office on site? Do they offer you the flexibility that you need? And again, a lot of these questions are the same questions that that somebody should ask about a co-packer. We love all of our tenants, but I think my favorite tenants are the ones who are actually refugees from bad co-packing relationships, because they really understand what they're getting. And, I'm thinking about a company that made keto-based snacks, who came to us after 2 divorces from co-packers. And the first time they went to a co-packer, they did it, again, to use the dating analogy, they did it because they didn't realize they had other options. And they needed, it was kind of like, you're moving out from your long-term partner, they're keeping the house, you don't have a place to go, you find somebody immediately because you don't want to be homeless. That was their situation. And they went to somebody who was available, but they were not, that co-packer was too big for them. And they spent months and months waiting to get on the line. And when they got their game-changing order of 10,000 units, that co-packer let them down and they had to leave. And then they went to another co-packer that was too small and could never get off the ground for that reason. They spent a year with us refining their process, really understanding it, and slowly developing relationships with co-packers. And instead of going to a co-packer, the first business development meeting and saying, am I getting a good feeling or not? They were able to literally show them a video of their process and say, can you do this? And that's a very different kind of conversation to have. Mm-hmm. And so I just say, the more you know about yourself, the more you know about what your needs are, the better a relationship you're going to have either with a co-packer or a self-manufacturing facility.
That's a great point, because I think what that does is when you open that conversation with either of those partners, you have a lot more of the control of that conversation versus being dictated to. You can be more clear on, no, this is a deal, no deal. This is what I need.
You can be concrete as opposed to simply relying on how you feel, which is important also.
It's important. I mean,
end-all, be-all.
Yeah, I know. We're turning this into the eHarmony of manufacturing here, but let's go to the next step. So we've talked about, what makes a good co-packer or a production partner. But there's a really practical thing here. And I imagine we have a lot of attendees here that really are here kind of for this. They don't know where to start. And obviously Pilot R&D is a phenomenal resource for this, but I'd love, Ali, for you to sort of talk about, I'm sure there's other listings or places or sites that you recommend for people to get a start.
This is a question we get pretty frequently. Mm-hmm. The view behind the curtain is finding the name of the co-packer is the easiest part. Like, it's Google. It's meeting people at trade shows. Every once in a while, we will find a co-packer that's kind of like in stealth mode, and we're introduced to them through an equipment purveyor. That's actually another really great place to go. If let's say you're making frozen dumplings, and you're talking to a manufacturer of an automated filling and forming machine, they can tell you what facilities they've put those machines into. Those are great ways to find a co-packer or a self-manufacturing facility. But truly finding it is important, but on its own, kind of meaningless. So much of the success of that outcome, of that matchmaking, is how prepared you are to take the steps that follow. So like every once in a while, we'll get people who call us and they'll say, hey, I have a vinegar, like a really cool infused fruit vinegar, and I want to turn it into like a shrub. I want to make a soda out of it. Do you know any beverage co-packers? And we'll say, sure, here's 3. And they're like, well, we haven't, like, do I have to pay you for your time? And our stance is truly, it's maybe more of like an old school food consultant thing to be like really protective of your Rolodex. To us, making a 30-second email introduction is fine, because frankly, there's the value of what we do comes from what happens after that. And meeting a co-packer is easy. Getting on the phone with one is slightly harder, but with a little tenacity and calling them 3 times in a week, you'll get through. Getting them to agree to take your business, scheduling a trial day, getting to that trial day in a way that you're prepared, actually executing it, dealing with whatever hurdles come up, coming up with solutions to them and then implementing that for long-term production,
Mhm.
whether at a co-packer or starting up your frying system at a self-manufacturing facility for the first time. The nuts and bolts of it are way more important than the Rolodex. And while, yeah, like I would love the obvious answer to be, what team should I engage to be pilot? There's a bunch of really excellent food product development firms out there that can help. My word of caution would be try to go with a team rather than an individual freelancer. I would say we inherit a ton of projects from failed attempts of somebody with a food science degree or somebody who's like a research chef who just kind of knows the principles of how to make mayonnaise and knows how emulsions work and knows how, you know, you have to get to a certain pH and a certain total acid content, but doesn't really have any handle on what happens after that. And so when it comes to scaled production of any kind, self-manufacturer, co-packer, building out, you know, buying a plot of land and building a giant factory, somebody, it does not have to be us, but ideally somebody needs to be able to take the reins on what the product needs in order to reach scale, because food is unique versus any other kind of industrial business in that the food invariably calls all of the shots. It's important to have your marketing and your package design and your website and all this other stuff. It's all moot if the food won't cooperate, and the food is going to tend to want to not cooperate more often than not. So having a clear game plan of what's going to need to happen is critical. And so having somebody on hand who speaks food and speaks scaled production is indispensable.
Yeah, I can see where having a team and having that bench strength to sort of help advise on multiple facets of it. So not just how the mayonnaise is made, the business acumen to get it made. How do we get it shipped? How do we sell? What's our packaging? All that good stuff. So I appreciate the thoughts there. Let's go on to because I am being mindful of the time. So I do want to go on to our next.
And Marcy, I know, and I'm sorry, and I'm jumping in here, but I just want to put another plug in for firms like Pilot, and there are other ones out there that do similar stuff. There's another one that we've done a lot of work with called FoodWit, which is more quality and
FoodWit is amazing.
Yeah.
Cosign. Yeah.
And I just want to say that the requirements for going into a co-packer are stricter than the team requirements for going to self-manufacturing. Self-manufacturing is a lot more forgiving, and you can actually use that time to build your team. But if you're not a competent owner when you go into a co-packing relationship and you trust them, this is actually something that Rob Greisen from FoodWit talks about. If you trust the co-packer when they say, "We'll do your R&D for you, don't worry," you've handed over a tremendously important thing that could absolutely make or break you. And personally, the co-packer's motivation is efficiency. So I'm not going to trust somebody who only cares about efficiency to do quality for my product. If I only have a food scientist on my team, I know this is something you've said, Ali, about they can get kind of abstract and might not care as much about the taste of the food. I know Brian might as a lawyer might bring up the notions of, and I think Marcy, we're going there later in this conversation, but IP. You need to have all of those resources there working for you as the owner who cares about the ultimate product. Because again, the co-packer is going to go for efficiency over everything else, and you need to be competent to advocate for yourself. Yes. And actually, it's a good segue into the next question, which is about supply chain and formulation issues that arise. So, understanding if you aren't using a team, if you don't have this bench strength, these are things that come up when we scale products anywhere, right? It's a pain point that has to be, you have to see the future and you have to see how to scale. So, I would love to hear, maybe Brian, maybe you have some thoughts on, how these problems show up
out of the blue and how you can be prepared to handle them.
Yeah, in our experience, and it's really the experience of the tenants of AMP that we've seen over the years, the problems arise at every level. I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with many of them and is, dealing with many of them all the time. The, supply chain and formulation specifically, the way we kind of think about these things is, a lot of it is, experimentation, having the ability to trial and error and working through kinks on the run in your production, having time in a facility to do trial runs, and, giving your products, both, your kind of existing products, the space and time, so you're producing, but also devoting enough time to improving them, to developing new products, all of that. And so having the ability in a self-manufacturing facility to both be able to handle your production as well as your R&D, and you've got everything there. And I'm interested in Ali's experience with this, but my guess is doing R&D at a co-packer can be expensive and a bit clunky unless they're really letting you into the space and work. And my guess is not a lot of co-packers like that. The other piece I would throw on this is in a facility like AMPed, and also I think I saw Natalie Schmulik's on this, so the incubator space that they occupy at the hatchery, where you've got a community of people and other food makers who can help you develop relationships in the supply chain, who can help you think through formulation issues. And so the importance of community, I think, really needs to be emphasized here, and the ability to talk to companies like yours and understand how they've handled these problems, who they go to for these items, I think is vital. And so having someone to call is important.
Yeah. I think this is the perfect encapsulation of a big pitfall in food manufacturing is we have the formulation, let's start the scale up process. In my mind, you don't have a formulation until you have started the scale up process, if that makes sense. Food is sneaky and deceptive because pretty much all of us have decades of firsthand, like tangible empathic experience dealing with food. And the unique fact of the matter is most people can make like a really delicious protein bar just in their kitchen right now. You can do it. It's unlike like the automotive industry. Like you don't have any like hobbyist people who are like making brake pads to sell on Etsy, right? You're not like, it's harder to fall into that trap of, oh, I can make it here in my kitchen. Now all I got to do is make a few thousand. There shouldn't be any issues there. Food can kind of lull you into that false sense of security when truly manufacturing protein bars at scale is like making brake pads. Like it requires so much on the supply chain and the scale side that if you haven't accounted for it, you're going to be completely rudderless and adrift. So for the way we approach things, supply chain, benchtop R&D, and scale up all happen at the same time. Brian, I believe you put this really well. I've never met a co-packer who's like, come on in, do your R&D on our production floor. Our goal is always basically we have 1 week, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days maybe of trial run where we are paying thousands of dollars on that production floor to basically just do a dress rehearsal. You're not going to a co-packer to build the sets and figure out the lines and work out the blocking. You're doing like 1 or 2 dress rehearsal runs, and you need to have drilled everything and answered as many unknowns as you can so that those 1 or 2 or 3 days are just focused on final tune-ups before you're ready to launch into production. That's probably one of the big advantages of a self-manufacturing setup is, sure, you don't want to be paying rent and sitting on like nice, shiny, expensive equipment without actually producing product, but you're not as as fiercely on the clock. And you have more time to mock things up. And if you want to take a couple weeks of doing dry runs and constantly iterating, that works really well at a self-manufacturing facility. That'll either get you kicked out or completely drain your bank account at a co-packer. But on the supply chain side, that's probably the easiest to point out pitfall for anybody who's looking to scale their product, is you don't have a scalable formulation until that formulation is made using scaled ingredients that are available, organic or conventional, gluten-free or not, kosher or not, from concentrate, not from concentrate, with or without processing aid, additive ingredients from suppliers who will sell you less than a pallet or more than a truckload or whatever is right for your business. The supply chain side of it, I would say, is sneakily one of the most important things that you can do to get ready for scale. When we work with our clients, we set them up with options for scaled suppliers to get going, so that they can start production day one with reputable, good options. There are always options out there for everything from almond pieces to blueberry puree. There's going to be like 5 or 6 options out there, and they're going to kind of fluctuate on cost. And your cost model is going to be this living, breathing organism that you need somebody to manage long term. And for that, having a person dedicated to supply chain after you're scaled is huge. And similar to FoodWit, there's a company called Mbach that we really like working with, who, just to give a specific example, they're kind of like they're like a pilot, but for ongoing supply chain management. And if you don't have, the bandwidth to hire a permanent head of ops or head of supply chain, companies like that help take what you're doing and run with it.
So on that note, we're talking about, supply, and we're talking about our goods and everything. I want to actually skip ahead, partially because of time, to this question, because I think that this is very related to what you were talking about, that idea of scale. Where are we resourcing things, and what is the impact on our cost of goods at co-packers and at self-manufacturing as you scale up? So I'd love to hear some thoughts on that from the team.
I mean, I could just kick this off that I've been shocked. Brian talked about how, all of our experience comes from the experience of our tenants, which is true, as we've watched them, either the ones who are refugees from co-packers or the ones who grow into co-packers. And the truth is, the cost of goods differential is all over the place. We've seen people who leave Amped and whose cost of goods have doubled in a co-packer. And in some cases, they've chosen to stay with that because they don't want to be in the business of self-manufacturing, or because the co-packer offers them a scale that they could never achieve otherwise, and they've got the orders to back them up, which is very important. I think, piggybacking off of the last question, I think an interesting frame for this is also like, what are the things that are going to impact your cost of goods at a co-packer? And, as Ali mentioned earlier, if you've got very conventional ingredients with a very conventional product, chances are you're going to get a great cost of goods at a co-packer. But it's not unusual for co-packers to have established and somewhat inflexible supply chain relationships themselves. And if you're getting a very particular spice or very particular, kind of chocolate, or somebody's saying it's hard to hear me. Is this any better? Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Yeah. Thank you for that comment. So if it's possible that the stuff that you're getting through your suppliers could be much more expensive or even not available at all at a co-packer who's got the ability to manage the process that you need. So I wanted to throw that out as some of the things to consider.
And that, I don't know that that's always the case. Like, we have seen many occasions where, I don't know, if you're using pink Himalayan salt in a formula, depending on the co-packer that you land at, they may already be bringing it in by the truckload. And you can piggyback on their price breaks and actually save some of your cost of goods. There are other times, exactly as you said, where somebody's going to say, I have never heard of turmeric. And I would say most co-packers are happy to use turmeric, just to pick a random example, if you are sourcing it for them, if you're coming to the table with a scaled ingredient supplier. I don't know that any co-packers we've seen are like thrilled with having to go hunt for esoteric ingredients, which is why just having a bulletproof supply chain going into the scale-up process is really important. But I think the essence of what you were saying, we've seen it manifest in that, first of all, there's not like a regulatory board that's going around and making sure that co-packers are actually running efficiently. There are just some co-packers who are wildly expensive for apparently no reason apart from the fact that they're not efficient. So I totally agree that there are going to be a lot of situations where self-manufacturing is actually cheaper unit per unit than many co-packers until you get to certain threshold scales. There are some unicorn examples out there where there's a co-packer who can produce in reasonable smaller quantities while also having a very reasonable tolling cost for you. But it's not a hard and fast rule, and that's probably like a false binary that co-packers are cost effective, self-manufacturing is expensive. I think depending on how you do it, they can flip-flop back and forth very easily. So
great. Let's go on to, we've talked about obviously ingredients and some of the pitfalls and things to look out for, but also the other sort of pillar in this decision process can often be, our minimum order quantity. So our MOQs. So I think probably the most well-known sort of piece of the co-packer piece is, well, you need 9 million units and you need all of, let's see, is that true, first of all? And I think the second question here is, is this something that you should set for yourself as a self-manufacturer in self-production? Should you be thinking about, hey, I shouldn't be going down this new flavor, this until I have sort of set my own benchmarks that I hold myself true to? Would love to hear some thoughts around this.
I would just kick it off by saying it's helpful for us to think about minimum order quantities as actually two different types of MOQ: the physical MOQ and the relationship MOQ. The physical MOQ is something that applies to self-manufacturer and co-packers equally, and that is, what is the minimum amount of stuff that will get the equipment to run correctly? So if you're using a food processor, just like a commercial scale food processor, what's the minimum amount of pesto that you have to run in order for it to get above the level of the blades? Now you extrapolate that out to a co-packer, that can be hundreds of gallons or hundreds of pounds of nut butter that you need to get the mixer to work properly. I've often found that it's actually very helpful to ask a co-packer and just say up front, now I understand that you're going to have MOQs of just what makes your business happy. We'd also, for the purposes just of a trial day, to understand what the minimums are to get your tanks to work and to get the pumps to function correctly and to basically turn the lights on. So that's one. Then the other one is what are the MOQs that make it worthwhile for a co-packer to run your product? So if a physical MOQ is 50 gallons, maybe their relationship MOQ is 5,000 gallons because of the way that their shifts work and their labor calculations and their utilities constraints and all that sort of stuff. And the main trade-off between co-packer and self-manufacturing is, in a co-packer, you're beholden to somebody else doing that math and telling you if your business is worth their while. On self-manufacturing, you are in control of that calculation, but you also got to get that calculation right or you're going to end up losing a lot of money. So there's pros and cons to both sides of it. The other thing that I would really, really stress is that this is the thing that varies the most from category to category. If you're making like a gluten-free pancake mix, the equipment that's required for the food safety of that product to be correct is the ability to put powder into a bag. You can seal the bags by hand. You can seal the bags on ultra fast automated 100 bag per minute packaging line. So the physical MOQs for a product like that and the relationship MOQs are pretty flexible. For something like a shelf-stable aseptic nut milk, it's on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. That's the most expensive, most highly specialized type of food production there is out there. And the equipment to do that, to run through like a Tetra Pak line, is tens of millions of dollars. So any co-packer who's going to foot the bill to put that equipment into their facility is going to run, we've seen on average, hundreds of thousands of units per run on the low end.
Wow.
Millions of units per run on the high end.
Yeah.
And we've
Wow.
seen that as plant-based milks and protein beverages and all these kinds of things have really picked up a lot of steam. It's a huge supply and demand issue where there's only like a dozen or so facilities in North America or in the United States specifically that can run those types of products. And so we've had clients who've said, hey, we have 5 million units of demand ready to go. Will you take us on? And we've seen co-packers kind of hem and haw at it, where if you told somebody who's making pancake mix, hey, we want to make 5 million bags in the first half of 2021, they're like, do you want to fly the plane? Like, here's the piece.
Yeah, there's a difference in value there to them because of ease of adoption. So that makes sense. You know, we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to make sure we get to our next question because I know that a lot of the attendees are interested in this, which is the IP question and understanding the risks of saying, here's my baby that I created and here you go. And is it really much more protected in self-manufacturing, self-production, you know? So Brian, I would love for you to sort of chat about that.
Sure. And just very quickly on the order quantity question for self-manufacturing, I'll just give our perspective very fast, which is, you know, we're rather than looking at the top end, we're often looking at, you know, people deciding, you know, am I big enough for self-manufacturing, sort of growing out of either a home kitchen or an hourly kitchen. And typically what we'll say is if you're working on your food business more than about 20 hours a week, self-manufacturing starts to make sense, and it's a good option, and it's often a better option than an hourly space, and more cost efficient to come and get your own space. But it can also depend on where your orders are coming from and whether they're going to require it as well. So with that quick sort of preface, the IP question is a tricky one, and it's particularly tricky in food manufacturing because, as I'm sure most people on here already know, there isn't much IP protection in general in recipes. And so the reality is that it is difficult to really protect, you know, an innovation in the food space. And so you know, a lot of it comes down to on the manufacturing side, you know, what do your agreements look like with your co-packer, and, you know, can you get them to agree to a non-competition arrangement? My guess is some will agree to that, many will not. You know, on the self-manufacturing side, it's obviously a lot more straightforward. You're in your own space. You are in control of it. Nobody else, you know, in general, as long as you have your own production space as you would at a place like Amped, you're really, you know, the IP risks are pretty minimal. It's really as you're expanding out and inviting a third party into your production, as you do with a co-packer, that these challenges really come up. And so, you know, I'd hand it to Ali to get a little bit of on the ground experience and what your clients see and how they handle this.
Yeah, I think you put it best. I'm not an IP lawyer, but in general, in food, there's not a ton of precedent for like patenting recipes and things like that. Most of the best held secrets are like trade secrets. So like for Coca-Cola, there's a couple of people alive at any given point who know what that formulation is. And I don't know if these stories are apocryphal, but I've heard that like they don't fly on the same plane at the same time. And that kind of stuff is really going above and beyond. But I can say that a couple of specific ways, I can give a couple cautionary tales of specific ways you can jeopardize your IP in the absence of just a foolproof plan of protecting it against all comers. Number one, if IP is important to you, if owning your recipes and your intellectual property is important to you, don't take the bargain of a co-packer doing free R&D in exchange for owning your formula. That's another one of the usual suspects where people come to us and they say, hey, we've been making this protein bar for 2 years and we're selling tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of units of it. We actually don't know what our formula is. And we want to leave this co-packer because they're closing or they're a nightmare, or we got a better option at another co-packer and we don't know what our percentages are. That is a huge one. And that happens, I would say that happens a lot more with beverages and protein bars than any other category. The other categories are not immune, but I think it's part of, like, if you have a bar forming line or if you have like a soda bottling line, you can produce a ton of different kinds of products. And so co-packers don't have to have a ton of technical expertise to just be like, yeah, we'll make you a root beer, or we'll make you a chocolate chip soy protein bar. And then they offer to do it for free, which is great. But honestly, I think if you don't have the budget to pay for the R&D to own your own operation, I think there's probably going to be other unforeseen cost hurdles that are going to handicap you later on. So you might want to rethink scale at that point anyway. An analogous thing can happen with some ingredient suppliers. So like spice companies, for instance, or gum stabilizer companies, they'll say, hey, buy our pre-made ice cream stabilizer, and you just add this and you're good to go. Or buy our gingerbread spice mix or our curry spice mix or whatever. That's fine. I think that's less of a dire consequence than trading your soul to a person who owns your whole recipe. But wherever possible, we would always recommend, if you want a gingerbread spice cookie, rather than just buying the spice blend off the rack, so to speak, tweak and fine tune it yourself and say, I want this amount of ginger, this amount of clove, this amount of allspice, this amount of cinnamon, and then bring that to a spice manufacturer and say, hey, I want you to pre-blend this for me. We'll buy it from you. But just so everybody's clear, we are providing these formulas to you. This is our IP and you are producing it on our behalf. I would always recommend that route wherever possible, with obviously the acknowledgement that not everybody has unlimited time and money. So there may be situations where making some of those compromises makes sense. I would just always want people to make those compromises with a full head of steam and knowing what they're getting into.
Great. We are at the end of our hour, and I would like to, of course, thank our panelists for sharing all of their knowledge, years of knowledge and experience with everybody, but they don't disappear. You can find everybody here on our panel here, plus other really helpful people at the organizations at the websites listed here. So you can reach out, you can send questions. Of course, there's contact information there if you'd like more information, or anything that we can do to help you in your journey to be awesome and find success in your business, whatever path that might be. We will be having some more webinars in the future, and because you have attended here, we will reach out to you and see if you're interested in attending those as well. We'd also love to hear from you if you have ideas for webinars and topics that you would like to cover that might be important to your business. We would love for you to make those suggestions, and we can put those together and get your answers up on the screen. Recording will be sent to you probably within 24 to 48 hours. And again, feel free to share that. So thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you to the panelists for being smart. And that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. Great job, Marcy.
Fun.